We're live with the Real Fridays video podcast, America's most watched video podcast on mortgage, real estate, and housing. We have obviously a very special sort of lineup. Ironically enough, Brian View, who's kind of a regular guest, who's an executive and one of the co-founders of FinLocker, is also a guest, but kind of a pretty consistent figure on the show. So welcome, Brian. I appreciate you filling in for Brock Cassidy.
I'm like the fifth Beatle.
That's right. And Jeremy Potter is infamously late, probably about 2 to 3 minutes after the start of every podcast. So hopefully he'll be joining us here fairly soon. But we're very fortunate to have Dr. Andrew Maas. Andrew he's an instructor at Stanford University, and he did his PhD at Stanford, and he also started a company called Pointable Solutions, which is a Silicon Valley tech company that works with fintech and lenders and financial institutions, amongst others, to implement AI-driven solutions. So, Andrew, welcome to the VideoCast.
Hey, good to see you, everybody, and thanks for having me on.
Andrew, you've made kind of quite a splash. I mean, financial institutions are historically famous for being laggards to technology, right? They're very, there's always the core book of business that lenders and that financial institutions are protecting. And then there's kind of slow, investments in new solutions. But ever since I know you attended the Independent Mortgage Banking Conference back in New Orleans, where we met up, and I know you're going to be speaking at the HousingWire conference, the AI conference here come in July. It's great to have you a part of it, but you're making quite a splash in the conversation with tech, within the tech community and with lenders alike.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm still, I'd say, relatively new to kind of the mortgage and lending space. So I did a PhD at Stanford. I focused on computer science, so large-scale deep learning, what became all of these kind of LLMs and ChatGPT type models. But I started a previous company in healthcare, and it's been amazing to see over the last 3 years, not just the mortgage sector, but a lot of large kind of legacy enterprise industries taking up new AI technology much faster than we saw back in 2015, 2017. And I think a big part of why is because the new wave of technology has really unlocked a bunch of use cases because it's much cheaper and quicker to develop AI solutions for things that previously you might have said, well, you need a whole team and a few $1 million, right? And so for me, the last year or so now of Pointable's development, we've been working with people in a couple of focus industries. Mortgage is one of them. And you can really see the transformation opportunities in mortgage because you have a lot of stuff that's just human back and forth that doesn't need to be. And we can leverage people's expertise in more focused ways and take away a lot of the busy work. And that leads oftentimes to better customer satisfaction, oftentimes better revenue or better, profits. So it's really exciting, but I would say I'm still, learning a ton about the mortgage space as I go.
I was going to add, Rick, Andrew, do you think part of the benefit in an industry like mortgage is, you can pick components of the process, and you don't have to do it across the entire manufacturing process, but you can kind of pick components, and to your point, maybe bring in a partner and just focus on one aspect at a time versus trying to do the whole thing at once.
Yeah, I mean, as we, if we get deeper into kind of, what is AI and different use cases type of stuff, it's certainly not a monolith, right? There's a bunch of different places where a small lender versus a very large organization versus a bank can use different types of AI or different AI solutions in different ways. And I think it's actually a mistake to think about this as like, we're going to buy a robot that does everything. The more likely scenario is you're going to find places where your humans are spending time and don't need to, and you're going to find ways to leverage them more effectively, right? So our goal is always that humans spend 100% of the time doing things that require sort of human judgment, common sense, those types of higher stakes decisions, and everything else we can automate away. In mortgage, because you have so many different players and so many different people who own their own tech stack, you can deploy these use cases in a more focused way.
You know, what's interesting, Andrew, is that, and we'll talk about this a bit more at the AI conference. The AI conference at HousingWire is going to be, it'll be a combination of more, probably interestingly enough, more C-level and owners and executives who run mortgage companies on the business side, because they're all scratching their head trying to figure out the best use cases and kind of where to start and sort of how to take those first steps in pursuing the use cases that, you know, that are identified. Because part of what we've struggled with is the mortgage industry is very much peaks and valleys, right? And it's not unlike traditional manufacturing where demand hits high, you hire really quickly, the cost of labor goes up dramatically. And then when demand drops because of the rate environment or different sort of geopolitical causes and effects, there's constant reduction in headcount. So there's a constant. So then there's issues in training and ramping up, resources, and then once they've ramped and they've been trained, then you're laying them off. And there's this constant ebb and flow of headcount within organizations. And then there's the regulatory component. We're added regulatory pieces for audits, compliance, quality, QC, legal review. All ends up becoming increasingly more expensive, right? So throughout the last, let's call it, really since the crash in 2008, it used to be back in, Brian remembers, we remember these days where, 80% of the organization was sales, 20% was, your back office people. Now it flipped. Now 80% of your costs and overhead are these back office people because we're just throwing bodies at all these repeatable, processes, right? And then the salespeople are almost less in number. So now it's probably 65 or 70-30 or 65-35, ops related, right? And so now with the focus on AI, C-level individuals and people who run these mortgage companies and these finance institutions are saying to themselves, how do we scale our volume by leveraging AI and leveraging the technology by capping our overhead expenditures? More of a comment than a question, but it seems like that's probably that kind of points to your case and with other industries as well on the more effective use cases of AI.
Well, I mean, there's one thing you said there that stood out to me, which is you have this scale up and scale down problem, which is as things get busy, you have to train a bunch of people. You need to rely on them to be well trained in order to be effective, right? And it turns out that that's not too different than what happens in different types of call centers, right? So if someone is a call center agent, they need to become an expert on some massive manual of information. And at Pointable, we're actually working with a call center outsourcing technology operator, and they're building AI co-pilots that help during the call or during an interaction, the agent can search, right? And so the effect of this is instead of you needing to train and study for a month before you can take your first call and be effective, I only need to give you 2 weeks because you can learn kind of the rough sketch. And because you have that AI support during your interaction with the customer, you require less training in your brain, basically, right? So you're offloading some of that expertise to the AI system, and you're letting the AI system be the partner to, in the mortgage space, it would be someone like a loan officer, right? Or even someone in, a lower stakes back office job who just needs to explain things as things get busy, right? But if you can offload some of that, I hire a human, I have to train them for a while and cram a bunch of stuff. And instead you say, I hire a human, I train them a little bit, and I give them this support so that they can be an expert in real time in all of the complicated, offerings that we have, or a process or compliance, so on. So I think that's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, I love that, Rick. When I think about what Andrew just explained, it's maybe not the traditional loan officer where you plug this assistant in, but in in our current world, we have this loan officer assistant, right? This LOA that exists in a lot of cases, especially with larger producers. That LOA a lot of times is having a lot of those conversations with the consumer. And I think this is where you could definitely scale up, maybe bring somebody into that role that's not as seasoned and leverage this, this database of learning that's happening in real time to better assist the consumers. And then the LO can do the biz dev things at the true top of the funnel that they're really good at.
Well, Andrew and I had this conversation with Dave Savage, the founder of Mortgage Coach and now Trust Engine, back at the IMB in New Orleans. And, people like Dave Savage are in not just himself, of course, his, I'm going to add Jeremy here. Jeremy, welcome, buddy.
Everybody.
So part of what, I spoke about with Dave Savage was, how do we scale Dave? Dave is one guy, and he's got 30 years of scripts. He's got 30 years of effective sales strategies, 30 years of documented, sales solutions that are all almost like reference manuals of what to do and when, given the scenario, right? If the objective is this, here's the response. If the objective is this, here's the response. And then you go through these sales coaching kind of sort of exercises, trying to level set the skill set of loan officers, right? And the conversation we had is, why aren't we taking a Dave Savage and all these libraries of information, both video and in written text, right, in manuals, and then organizing kind of an AI sort of solution in a way that sort of automates that. So it's kind of like long past a Dave Savage existence physically here in the business. Let's say he retires tomorrow. There's a way of tapping into that knowledge base, right? To be able to level set the way in which a loan officer engages with the consumer, or a way in which a loan officer is trained to engage directly with the consumer, right? And it up to this point where that simply just wasn't even feasible. Welcome, Jeremy. How are you, man?
Hey, good to be here, everybody. Andrew, thanks for joining us. I'm curious. Rick would love to know whether AI can help me be on time. It seems to be a thing that, he's really bothered by. And I think it goes to how, conversational our show is. And I think it makes us more human, but he does not agree. So number one question is, can AI help me be on time?
I don't think it can.
We could build you a little app that learns how to alarm you at the appropriate times, right? So it can be dynamically optimizing how many different alarms and how many minutes before the meeting, so that you actually show up.
All right, I like that. I'll give that a shot.
As long as it's wirelessly tethered or connected to like a shock collar, so that way there's a certain cutoff point where it just wirelessly activates a charge and it just automatically just moves them to the camera.
That's right. Thanks for joining us.
What would you say in your experience working with companies, both in the financial sectors and non-finance? What do you think the common mistakes companies make in their approach to AI, Andrew?
I think the two biggest mistakes I see are lack of clarity on a use case and then kind of grandiose visions that don't turn into things. So lack of clarity on a use case, I think that's a little easier these days. But so back when I was in kind of healthcare, I would go to different pharmaceutical companies, health insurers, folks like that. And they would love to sort of talk about AI, but it was very hard for them to figure out, here's a project we want to start on, right? And so I'd end up on, a lot of internal data science discussions, and they maybe had small ways, but they would never sort of come up with an ambitious sort of first thing to try, then be concrete about, right? And I think Brian mentioned that earlier, right? There's a bunch of small ways that you can deploy AI systems that are actually really valuable, but you have to say, okay, we're going to automate helping an LO send an email comparing different loan packages, or we're going to automate the kind of first top of funnel sign up so that we just get more leads in because we don't think we're, using our human time effectively there, right? So being specific about use case, that allows you to actually like move forward and say, can an AI system do this? What type of AI system? How expensive would it be, right? And then the other thing that I think we just saw a wave of with, the ChatGPT hype and all that for the last year or two now is especially some larger enterprises said, okay, we're doing AI now. We're going to be AI first. Let's go spend $2 million. And, there are certainly vendors out there like OpenAI and Microsoft. Microsoft will figure out how you can spend $2 million on AI with them today, right? They won't tell you that it's building models that are likely not going to be very helpful to you in 6 months, but they'll take your money and they'll burn it on compute. So when you see a wave of big investment without a clear vision like that, it leaves a bad taste in folks' mouth, and then they don't kind of discover the real tangible, valuable stuff. And so I think when you start with some of the more tangible, valuable, let's iterate from things that can, add some value within 3 to 6 months, say, you build into these more interesting, and then you have a sense for how to do it. And so then you say, okay, let's bite off a bigger chunk. Let's go automate something that's a little more risky in terms of how it integrates with our workflow or in terms of how compliance reporting works for it.
So I have a question on that because I think that's a great point. The business process outsourcing dilemma or decision has been around forever in one way or another. Do I outsource this to vendor A, vendor B? Do I outsource this onshore, offshore? Do I outsource? There were just all these iterations. Do you see in the way you were just talking about automating that this is just the next generation of that type of decision making for executives? Or is there something about delegating to AI that is fundamentally different or new for companies to be thinking about?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so far we've talked about AI at a very high level, right? But I think especially the latest generation of tools, part of why they're so exciting is because we're actually not in a place where we need to make that kind of binary outsourcing decision. So one use of AI that I think probably everyone in the mortgage industry should be thinking about is once you have an enterprise LLM, that means like your enterprise version of ChatGPT, or you figured out whatever data security, data privacy stuff around using a model like ChatGPT or Bard or Gemini Pro, whatever. Using those things to write marketing copy and emails is like a no-brainer, right? Because it just helps, right? Even if you spend a lot of time writing, if you're a good writer, like I write a lot of lecture notes, for example, it just helps. Like I can write the same lecture notes, but being able to toss in some bullet points and have it spit out some prose and then I iterate off of that saves me an hour at least. That is a use of an AI system that every organization should be adopting, or you're going to slowly get out competed on basically cost of producing those materials, right? Or you'll be out in the market with materials and emails to customers that are just not as good as other people's, right? And so that's not something that you need to, I think, make an outsourcing decision about. That's more a decision around how do I enable my in-house teams to leverage AI effectively, right? And so I think you certainly have projects where you engage, like Pointable, what my company does is we help people build like higher stakes, like AI agents and automation flows for things. So we have a project where we're doing, for example, an entire loan application in a flow, and that's customized conversational interface based on the rules backend and what it says I need to know for your loan application and how I process that information to turn it into offers. So that's pretty complicated. And for that, you might think of it as kind of the outsourcing decision where do I engage an external vendor? Can we do this internally? But I think don't miss the opportunity that in this era of AI, there's a bunch of just kind of general tools like writing tools and image generation tools. And then there's an increasing number of kind of point solutions where you can do like better marketing automation stuff because of an AI specific vendor enabling you to move faster, right? And so for that, I think it's more being a smart buyer and being clear on what you're getting and what you're not getting if you, for example, like buy OpenAI Enterprise, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like that too, because I think conversational AI has been the most understood in the mortgage industry as well. So it's like, if you can start from a place you get it, like
Right.
FAQs, email triage, like you said, those entry questions or data entry type questions, I think that's super fascinating too. And then what I'm hearing you say on top of everything is there's actually this way to think about this, that a machine is pointable tool that you've built, looks backwards. What do I need in what order to make this complete so I can make an offer? And then you just know, all right, I'm collecting this and I'm filling it up until I have everything I need. And it can just keep going with a customer and sort of benefit everyone. And I'm curious if that is, I'm curious if that's also, doable with data. So obviously there's conversational AI, and then there's things you need in a loan application where it's like, here's where
Like a
that
form
data
fill? Are you
is.
talking about like a
Right.
form fill, Jeremy?
Yeah. So you're in that conversation, and then the consumer's like, oh, that's a PDF, or that's in my account. Are we at a point also where you can start grabbing data that's out there, documents that are out there during that same flow, and really like do this A to Z? Just your first instinct at the mortgage flow?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're getting there, right? Because you would want to, you need to do some engineering for a system like that. It's not just
Okay.
going to be kind of out of the box, like throw it to ChatGPT, right? That's not how 99.9 of these systems work, right?
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
but we're getting to a point now where if I have some PDF information from you about, say, like payment stub or credit history or other pieces, and then I need to kind of use that as part of a broader kind of workflow,
Mm-hmm.
you're getting enough automation that you should be able to put together kind of a fully formed and at least initially automatically reviewed packet for something like
Right.
that.
Okay. Great.
And again, this is where you get into, per your last question, some of the kind of cost benefit analysis, which is, I think that these days building some of what you described, just in terms of, a good engineering team with the latest AI tools could do this for, I don't know, I'm gonna overestimate and say $500,000.
Mm-hmm.
And 5 years ago, if you would have asked, I would have said maybe $3 to $5 million,
Mm-hmm.
because that's how different the technology is in understanding the PDF side of it, handling some of these fuzzy, being flexible around like driving the automation process forward, even though the user might have like different things that they want to do at different times. And so, if that means that for your business, investing, 500K to get that level of automation is going to unlock enough lead gen, enough time of your experts, then it makes total sense, right?
That's extremely valuable to mortgage executives, in my opinion. I haven't heard it put that way before, but I think that is a great way of framing it up.
Yeah, I think
There's
one of
there's
the
a
things.
thing that people in AI have started to talk about that I really like applied to AI systems, which is this notion of total cost of ownership, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about that system you just described, it's
Mm-hmm.
if you can sort of estimate by having, a good partner that understands the technology side, you can
Mm-hmm.
estimate how much it costs you to run that system every year, then it becomes a very easy decision for you, because you can say, here's the boundaries of what the system does, here's how much it costs. But
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes in AI, we're really bad at estimating. Like we kind of overpromise on the value in fuzzy ways, and we don't tell you about how expensive it is on the back end of some of the data and compute, depending on the use case we're talking about.
Yeah.
Based on what you described in terms of like just comparing, the cost maybe 2 years ago to today in terms of that implementation, I'm guessing there's smaller pieces that would be less than $500,000 in terms of investment. Maybe it's 100,000 as an example, but 2 years ago would have cost you, 3 full-time employees, 6 months of
Oh,
work.
absolutely.
So I think what I'm hearing is there's a lot of opportunity for test and learn, small test and learns today that you just wouldn't have had even 12 months ago, based on where the technology is today.
Absolutely. And to give people a little insight on why, right? So I've said AI isn't a monolith, but we haven't really talked about some of the different technologies there. But the really exciting stuff where it's yeah, you're going from development efforts that would have been, multiple people, multi-million-dollar things over, 12 months at least, into something that we have off the shelf AI models that can get us very far. The big differences in where that's coming from is we've made a huge amount of progress on some core kind of AI problems that allow us to work with different types of data. So one of those is speech recognition. So a few years ago, for me to transcribe all of your calls coming out of your system would have been way more expensive. For me to then do analytics on top of those transcripts would have been pretty expensive. The cost of that is now orders of magnitude less. So that's one. Another is parsing PDFs. So that thing of, someone uploads some PDFs, I want some AI model to extract some structure. Again, those things have gotten way better, way cheaper. And then the other one is the kind of conversational interface, right? So we've all seen, models like ChatGPT and Bard, and they're incredibly kind of chatty and fun and cute. But that also gives us the tools to, that use case I described where I'm going to have a conversation with someone and gather all the information I need to fill out a loan application. Prototyping those types of conversational interfaces is now, again, orders of magnitude cheaper. So because those things, speech recognition, PDF processing, image recognition, prototyping, conversational chat type of things, those are so applicable to so many different use cases. The fact that they've gotten so much cheaper unlocks a bunch of these smaller, you can do something for 10K in a month that would have been a research project a couple of years ago.
That's fascinating. Andrew, I know that at Sierra Pacific, we launched a platform that was built in-house called Hey Sierra, which is kind of an AI model that basically delivers it's like a product finder for consumers, right? And I know that the technologists at Sierra are gonna meet with you here in a couple of weeks around different use cases to be able to help extend their capabilities and to accelerate kind of their time to market with just new advancements. The question I have for you is and this question does come up, I think, implicitly. What do you think the difference is in your standard SQL developer or engineer or your standard software guy that works for a mortgage company? What would you say the difference between that coder is and someone who might work for you or someone who might be sort of a full-time AI sort of developer, in the way that it could be in the code itself, it could be in the approach to the problem? What would you say to be the key differences?
Oh, I mean, it's kind of like different universes when it comes down to it, because software engineering, if you're not in the field of software engineering, you might think of it as kind of, okay, write code. Or you might be aware that there's, different software engineering languages, but actually it's, far more subtle, right? So my example for this is I met a guy one time. He is a world expert in maintaining data sets that are so large that they must exist across multiple Facebook data centers. So he's one of 10 people in the world who knows how to give you the abstraction that your data that's actually spread across 10 different places in the world is one thing, and it's super fast. I tried to hire him in my previous company because we were working on database technology, and we had some fun beers because it became obvious 5 minutes into the conversation that there was just no reason why us as a tiny startup would ever have a need for his expertise, right? And so when we talk about sort of AI engineering, you get sort of less extreme, but the same sorts of things, which is the sort of machine learning engineers who work at Pointable. We work on core infrastructure, for example, continuous testing and automating testing of building one of these conversational interfaces or, software agents that's, filling out a loan application, maybe even, triggering API calls, whatever. And so our core expertise is the pure infrastructure of those machine learning systems. And we are very unfamiliar with how to integrate into a rules engine in the mortgage space. We're not familiar with all the various APIs of different CRM systems and other sort of big players in mortgage tech. And so, and a software engineer inside of a mortgage tech company, that's their universe, right? And so they might be very good at how various data interfaces come together and how to basically connect up what might be AI technology coming from a backend like Pointable into places where it's actually meaningful, right? And so I think oftentimes it's kind of partnership that leads to the best outcomes, because when you're talking about building a complex AI system, you need to be excellent in both sides of this, right? Which is, you need a bunch of infrastructure that helps you build the AI system quickly and make it do what you want. But just as important, you need software engineers who are thinking about, how do I plug this AI system into a CRM or into the workflow that a loan officer is actually using in my technology stack? Because if you get that wrong, you basically never adopt the AI, right? We've seen this a bunch actually in like doctors, right? So like if you don't integrate something into the software that a doctor is using properly, then it just never gets adopted. And I think, in software engineering, it's more people's experience and sort of what side of the software engineering world that they're interacting in day to day.
Bill Mitchell from LoanPass said AI will expand reach, lower costs, improve customer service, and bring a new level of loan origination precision. Because I'm really curious as to compliance and regulatory concerns in the unknowns. That is kind of interesting. Like in title, and Jeremy probably could speak to this, but lawyers like to be sort of the center of knowledge, right? And in AI to some degree is challenging that, in both. So it's kind of prudent that it's prudent to use some degree of caution, right? But at the same time, there's a tremendous amount of legal guidance you can get from using ChatGPT, for instance, right? And in some title companies and title underwriters, they're prohibited of using ChatGPT in providing legal consultation to their respective clients. I'm curious as to where do you see that balance? Do you see a lot of pushback on that, Andrew, on your side? Or do you see, or what about you, Jeremy? Do you see any kind of, do you see more resistance to this? Kind of like a la Uber wants to go into Las Vegas and Las Vegas says no because of it challenges the traditional sort of powers that be? Or do you see that changing where the legal community is saying, maybe we could use this to our advantage in more of an assisted way, as opposed to one that replaces what we're in place to do?
Andrew, do you want to go first, or I can add some context? I mean,
yeah, I'm actually really curious what you guys think of this, because I think different people have view on sort of what AI means as it relates to regulatory and compliance stuff. So I'd love to hear yours before I have very strong opinions.
Yeah, for sure. So to me, there was always the big difference between, and you alluded to this earlier, Andrew, the big difference between making your experts more expert and making decisions on behalf of your company. And to me, that's a very clear distinction. I know it gets blurry with how good technology has gotten in your world, but to me, I think there aren't that many compliance or regulatory concerns with using tools to get experts data, perspective, and insights better, faster, and stronger. And then the experts act on that infrastructure and act on what they've been served. And I think a lot of times people say, oh, there's compliance concerns, but they're not digging in to actually say, what are you asking the technology to do and who is it serving? And so the area for title, the area for legal, Rick, I put it in that bucket because I see it as making experts more expert. And I think people are afraid of it, just as human nature is always scared of changes and threats, blah, blah, blah. But I think where Andrew could weigh in too is when it's interacting with a customer, we have like this whole licensing regime that has gotten stood up just to say who can the customer about what. And so when technology is working with a customer, then it becomes a little bit blurry to say, okay, I don't have a compliance concern here relative to decision making or expertise. Like nobody's using AI to make a credit decision, for example, that I'm aware of yet. But if it's interacting with a customer, is AI presenting a mortgage offer? And theoretically, state regulators have only ever thought of that as a human behavior, a human presentation of an offer. Now, I would argue Rocket Mortgage is presenting offers directly from product pricing engines to the consumer, and they're using their tools, their slide bars, and their own knowledge to kind of figure that out. So it's less of a concern for me, as you can hear in my response, but I think there's a very big difference between decision making versus insights and analysis. And then second, I do think the consumer interaction piece complicates it a bit, but not enough to make it an obstacle for adoption. But Andrew, that was kind of my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. So actually, there's a nice kind of question that came in that relates to this, which is, if you take an example where a state has dictated that someone be licensed to take a mortgage application, what does that mean for AI relating to, automating the mortgage application process, right? And so there, I think it becomes a question of, what are the existing regulatory frameworks, or just what are the rules, and how would you fit automation while still adhering to those rules? And again, like my previous company, this is exactly what our product is still used by the people who acquired us to do exactly this, because by FDA regulation, you have to have a human expert review cases where a drug might have been involved in a death, and our technology speeds up those human experts by something like 2 to 5x, and it saves a tremendous amount of money. But in the end, a human expert is still in the loop doing the same thing, right? And so I think, part of my overall reaction to this is you have to look at the actual use case and workflow where you're introducing AI, and figure out the regulatory implications and just kind of design around them, right? And so oftentimes, when people are, worried about, AI is going to make biased decisions, it's like, well, when you actually deploy these things with the way that the process works for regulatory reasons, there's going to be a human in the loop anyway. And so the thing we have to worry about is, are we biasing the human in some weird way that we're not accounting for, which can be a problem, right? But the other side of that is, for things like AI making these things worse, if you're not making the final decision AI, and you're getting vastly more coverage on like, hey, did you miss this? Because you're using AI, it could actually be that your compliance is far better with an AI solution enabling a human expert or a kind of human judgment than what you would think of as, we're going to turn this decision entirely over to AI, and then we'll be sort of at the whim of the AI biases, right? So in practice, I'm very concerned about places where we have AI systems that might be feeding systematically biased information to a human decision maker, but I'm less concerned about automated AI decisions kind of going awry. And that's largely because, like, when there's such a high stakes decision, we usually have a human in the loop anyway. And there's a law basically requiring them to be there.
I love that, Andrew, because I think of it very similar from a product mindset. And let's use bias as an example. We have bias baked into financial systems. Clearly, there's bias kind of inherent and baked into credit systems. And now we're talking about bias baked into technology. Technology is developed by humans. It's going to consume human knowledge. It's going to respond with all the history and knowable facts and information on the web about human interactions over time. And so we're going to have these issues. One of the things I really like about, especially the conversational piece you were talking about, it can ask the right person the right question at the right time based on that data. We don't have that for quality control and compliance today. We do a ton of like retroactive reviews or escalation reviews. We don't do a lot of analysis right at the point of data, right at the point of interaction today. And so I'm very excited in the ways that AI can look at a loan file, can look at an interaction, can look at the data that's available as it's building that database on a particular file or on a particular transaction, and then say at exactly the right moment, pop the question in to the expert or to the customer or to the system to say, it looks like this. Have you thought about this? It looks like this. Have you asked this? Don't forget to do X, Y, Z. Sort of the same way we were joking earlier about reminding me to be on time. I just love this concept of what technology can do. And maybe you can speak a little more about serving up the right analysis question interaction to the right person at the right time and what that might do to our business.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a fantastic example where, you know, it's kind of the opposite of that surface level conversation about AI and the kind of scary risks, which is if you have something that's, you know, in some ways kind of this annoying thing that's listening to your conversation, but saying, hey, did you double check with this applicant that they have this, and that's actually the right information? Again, you know, like you're happier in the end because you're more compliant, you're more effective at, you know, enacting the policies. And I think that you know, you can measure and quantify because we can just run the AI systems over and over again. Are they behaving the way that we expect in a bunch of different scenarios? We can't always promise that we know how they'll behave on, you know, a very new situation. That's also true of humans. But we can at least verify that our AI systems are, you know, doing what we expect under a lot of different conditions.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, well said. Thank you so much for that explanation.
Andrew, what would you say to be the process of it? And I imagine it's different, but in my experience of in our talks has been Pointable and your team is a phenomenal resource to implement solutions or to develop solutions and to work with either a tech vendor or a lender to implement solutions if they themselves don't have the AI talent or development talent in-house to do it, or if they have their own, you know, if they have, you know, AI or the software talent to actually deliver on some AI solutions, your team tends to sort of work with them to kind of either almost, I look at it like braces on teeth, like as they grow in that AI direction, you're able to sort of comment on that direction to either affirm the direction that they're on, or perhaps make some changes to it, and or help them scale or extend their AI development schedule by just adding additional capacity, right? So what would you say to be like the process? What's the typical process that a financial institution or a tech vendor would go down with you? I mean, you've spoken to Brian, you know, at FinLocker, and I know there's a lot of conversations there. I spoke with Brian prior, and they just completed a big capital raise for their organization. And I know that they implementing a more intelligent review of a consumer's credit profile, and then to be able to counsel, you know, and that's in part why the questions around data sets is important, because you'll now have access through FinLocker, a consumer's credit profile with the consumer consent, and then you'll be able to extract that information and then digest it and then provide guidance to the consumer based on the behavior that exists in those data sets. So, what would you say to be the process that these organizations go about in working with Pointable?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of two places where organizations start working with us. One is like they've already built a prototype and they've, you know, maybe hit a wall in terms of performance, or they get stuck on, you know, how do we get something that's sufficiently high quality? There's some specific technical problems that oftentimes people struggle with when they're trying to build, you know, like a conversational agent or a software agent, like connecting it to external APIs or connecting it to, you know, vast amounts of internal data. And so some of those cases, it's someone already has a sense of the use case and they've gone so far as to build a prototype. And in many cases, they might not have built a prototype, but they have that kind of product vision, right? And so, basically, Pointable, we think of ourselves as a platform for people to build LLM applications, where an LLM application might be a kind of conversational interface software agent type of thing. It might be an internal, automating, processing a bunch of PDFs and condensing them into a summarized view, right? Both of those are kind of LLM applications to us. And we have a bunch of tools and infrastructure that allows people to kind of build out their product vision without having to hire, 2 to 3 ML engineers and build some infrastructure in order to have the foundation to try their idea. And so sort of what we're talking about on software engineering, with Pointable, we rely on having a partner that kind of has a vision for what they want to build, right? And so if you say, I want to build an automation that, processes parts of a loan application, right? That's something you can do on our platform a lot faster than, trying to hire an engineering team and trying to build it all in-house, for example. We've also seen a couple of cases where people want to build customized summaries, right? So if you have a bunch of subscribers or people, customers that you've interacted with that you're trying to keep warm, if I know something about their history and their interests, I can build this little LLM application that generates a very customized email for each, persona, or each, down to the level of each individual, so that I can drive, user engagement, or, keep those passive customers closer to me, right? And so again, that's something where someone has a vision, they want to do it. They might have, hacked on a little prototype to see it's possible, and we help them kind of scale that out into something that can go live and stay live in production.
That's incredible. The sales and marketing use cases that what you just articulated just now is really at the very nucleus of financial services, because it's all about, customer retention, customer for life. But once you have a customer for life, what do you do with that data? Like, how do you repurpose that data? You have that customer for life. You have all the working history, all the products that they've exercised, the loans that they've done, the circumstances under which that they took out those loans, what they used that money for. So you have all this body of work of your relationship, right? How are you repurposing that in a way that's useful for the customer, instructive, helpful, good instructional guidance, and how is it helpful for the enterprise, for the business? And that the surface hasn't even been scratched. I mean, there are certain chat sort of add-ons you could use for Exchange or Salesforce, where it kind of just automatically kicks out, almost like an autoresponder. So I look at it as the feature and functionality today as being very one-dimensional in the way that it automatically responds to the customer. It just has no depth. And to your point, there's no depth because there's no access. They haven't built the code to actually pull the information from the data sets in a way where you can respond in an educated or an informed way based on the relationship you have with the customer and the data you have based on the relationship.
I'll go back to one of the first things I heard Andrew say in our when I jumped on, which was you have to know what you're trying to accomplish. So, Rick, with what you just said, when I hear mortgage companies and mortgage servicers talk about lifetime value of the client, it's almost always lifetime value of the client to us, to the company, versus building something that takes that data and asks the question, what is our value? What's our lifetime value to them? Reversing that question is critically important to what are you trying to accomplish, and not enough companies reverse that question. They think about it, what's the lifetime value to me? And I think Andrew's given me some real insights this hour about how I can think about feeding conversational AI insights or innovation sparks to say, what's our value to them? And get back some insights and perspective that would actually, I think, influence how mortgage companies and mortgage servicers think about innovation because they need to start thinking about it, what's our lifetime value to the customer. And that hasn't been a big theme. I think now, necessity is the mother of invention, and I think that's starting to change. But that would be my pitch if I was looking at that across an enterprise today.
So, I mean, tying this together, right?
Andrew, give you the last word. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, here's a use case that, Pointable's not working on this, but I think this would be something where you have to figure out if it's valuable enough to your customers and it fits into a story of customer retention, customer kind of engagement. But if I could take everyone's historical data from interacting with me and build for them a customized, financial assistant where I can, email them and say, hey, at any time, your previous interactions with us are loaded into the back end of the system. And so if you're thinking about a refinance, if you're thinking about just what to do, or if you're curious about, all those little things like, are your appliances recalled, like kind of services that are, value add in this space, all of that is available to you in this one interface. Right. So these days, per the advances in AI technology, it's like you can feasibly, even if you're not a huge player in the mortgage space, you could build a solution like that for each of your individual customers and it could work. Right. And then the question is, do you view that as something that's valuable enough that you're going to take the initiative and build it out? Or does that fall into the category of, well, it's really hard to pin down the sort of incremental revenue from that type of system. Therefore, we're going to kind of wait. Right.
Well, that's fantastic,
Excellent.
Andrew.
Thank
I know
you.
we're a few minutes over here at Real Fridays, but love the points that you made here, and of course the work that you're doing. I think it's very important work, not just for the mortgage industry and financial institutions as a whole, but I think across all verticals. So we're very much looking forward to continuing the work together, and of course. I don't know if Jeremy, if you're going to go to the HousingWire AI conference in Dallas, Texas, I'm sure you are. Looking forward to seeing you there. And of course, Andrew and I will be on stage speaking on AI use cases in the mortgage business and mortgage industry there. So thank you for joining us, Andrew.
Well, I'll get
Thank you.
to meet
Thank
you
you
in
for having
person,
me.
Andrew, but thank you for your expertise and your time. We really, really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.